Welcome everyone to day one of the BFI Future Film Festival 2021. My name is Anna Bogutskaya and I'm so excited to be hosting today's hotspot with writer-director Remi Weekes. His name might be familiar already to many of you because he is responsible for many nightmares with his debut feature, His House, which premiered at Sundance Film Festival last year, where it got picked up by Netflix for global distribution. Remi, thank you so much for giving up a bit of your time today to talk to the feature film crowd.
Of course, no problem. Where do we begin?
I have a ton of questions. So I wanted to start really with the beginning, really with your relationship with film. Like, did you always like film? Did you always know that you wanted to work in film?
Yeah, I guess I think I made quite a bold decision when I was like 11 or 12, when I got to that age where I have to think about, we don't have to think about, but people start asking you, what do you want to be when you're older? And I think I was watching a movie and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. I want to make movies. And I kind of decided that and I stuck with it. So I think it's pure like stubbornness or an inability to like open my mind further that's led me here today.
Do you remember what movie it was?
You know, I think it's probably a horror film. I vaguely, and I think I'm wrong, but I always think I was watching Scream. However, I feel like maybe that's like an invented memory because I loved Scream when I was younger.
I mean, it's a great movie to push you into making horror films. And was there a moment when you realized that it was an industry, that there were a huge number of jobs that kind of film lovers and aspiring filmmakers could do?
I'm not quite like, it's hard to know what I was thinking when I was that age. However, like I do remember thinking directing. So I think people are quite literate about like the film industry, especially now that it's so much easier to do with, you know, your phone and stuff. But yeah, I think I know, like I definitely remember I went to film school. I went to London College of Communication and at University of the Arts. And I remember when I first got there realizing I knew nothing. And, like, other people knew so much, and I didn't, like, I feel like a bit of a fool now, but I remember genuinely not knowing the difference between shooting on film and shooting digitally, and being aware that everyone else was somewhat more knowledgeable about this kind of thing. So yeah, even though like I feel like I had an awareness of the industry, I think there's still a lot I needed to know.
And what was your experience like at film school?
Oh, it's great. Like I had a great time, but then I know like lots of people did not. I think it really does depend on where you are in your life and in your career. At LCC, I did, that was my BA, so that was my uni. I know that a lot of people do it postgrad, but I did it as something to study at uni, and so I was really green. I really didn't know anything, and so going to film school and watching movies every day and talking to other film fans about movies and then making films and talking about making films was like crazy. Like, that's so much fun. So I loved it.
And can you talk a little bit about kind of those first steps into making films?
Like making like short films, or?
Yeah, like the sort of films that you would make at LCC.
Well, and then again, I think people's experiences are probably different now because everyone has phones with recording equipment in them. But I remember when I was younger, I used like the family, holiday video camera, and that was my first entry into making films. And even at school, I used to make films at school when I was 12 or 13 with my friends. We used to make zombie movies, really bad zombie movies and science fiction. Bad, but also amazing. Like I think like we did some silly stuff, but that was my in. To be honest, I was a bit of a nerd. I became really like obsessed with that stuff, and so I had on my computer I downloaded all this software and I started to teach myself how to edit and how to do visual effects and CGI and how to, use Logic or sound design and make music and create sound effects and, create a little mini studio in my bedroom. And I mean, that's still how I operate now. I'm very much about the different axes of filmmaking. The short films I've done professionally as Tell No One, and even by myself as a feature film director, I'm very interested in the writing and the acting and the sound design and the music and the visual effects, and that's always kind of stayed with me.
That's so interesting. And because it sounds like you were making them in your bedroom as the kind of one studio, but how would you work, or did you find other collaborators while you were studying or as you were leaving university?
It's I think that's a good question and quite an important question, because filmmaking, even though it's now possible now that you can make films by yourself and never need to speak to a single person. There is still a beauty in collaboration, and that's not when you're, I want to guess that if you're a sensitive artist, to collaborate with a person can be quite difficult to begin with. But I think it's a really essential tool to be able to articulate your ideas to someone and to be able to develop something with someone, because it's an essential way of being able to understand what's going on inside your head and improving it and making it better, and that is something you can't just not everyone can do quick, not everyone can do easily. It takes some learning to let go and to open up your mental space to someone new.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point for anyone who's doing creative work. And I wanted to move on to Tell No One, which you've just brought up as well. Could you talk a little bit about that project? When did you set it up, and kind of what was the idea behind it?
Tell No One began when Tell No One is me and my friend from school, Luke Wright. We went to secondary school together, but we also went to the same uni. Mm-hmm. And after uni at LCC, we were just like, what next? Like, how do you make it in this industry? How do you get your foot in the door? And his dad had a photography studio. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to go into the studio. His dad had the Canon 5D, which is a photography camera, but also has some video making function, which at the time was really quite revolutionary. Yeah. And so we decided to just make films and use the studio, create something, put it on the internet. And that was the important thing, not just to create something, but to put it out there, put it on the internet, upload it to Remi on YouTube, and forget about whether it's good or not, or whether it will be popular or not. The internet has an uncanny way of deciding when something's good or not for you. So don't worry too much about that. Just make stuff, put it out, and then make something new, and then put it out and keep going until we find something. And that's how we started. And we made small little kind of experimental, just playful, not thinking too hard about it, short films, and trying to ignore that voice in our head that tells you like an idea is not ready or it's not good enough, just to do it and then just make something else. And we call ourselves Tell No One. And then we started doing that, and some videos got popular, and then as they got popular we started getting work, and then we moved into commercials and fashion film and the occasional music video.
And we'll definitely chat about that in a bit, but I'm interested in kind of as you were making this, and when I was looking it up online, I love the way that you described this kind of lo-fi video experiments. Yeah. As you were making that, were you also trying to get into the film and TV industry, or the film industry, more formally through other means, or were you just focusing on making work and putting it out there?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've attempted to do that. That was never that successful. I think in any way there's a weird mixture of talent and luck, right time, right place, right material, right work, and so it never really was as successful for me as maybe I wanted it to be. And so as I was doing Tell No One, I could feel myself kind of fading, being less excited about trying to get meetings with like film companies and stuff. And there's some pros and cons to that. The pros to our method was that, as you mentioned, we got into the commercial side of the industry reasonably quickly. Like they noticed us primarily because we were popular, and popularity is a very powerful signifier for commercial businesses. It says that people are interested in your work. On the downside, though, I began to drift away from what I really wanted to do, which was narrative, because you know, the narrative side of the film industry is very different to the commercial, and so you become successful in one and you start to disappear in the other. And so it took a real decision a few years ago to reorientate myself and to focus on narrative.
I wanted to talk a little bit about that time that you spent working more in the advertising and the commercial side of filmmaking. And so what was it like? So you put out these videos online with no expectations, and then you get popular. And like, what, two questions really. When you say you got popular, how popular are we talking about? And the other side to the question is, how did kind of the work start coming to you? Like, what was that like to suddenly get paid by commercial companies and brands to make more visual work?
Popular as in, well, like where we did a short film called Seaweed, and that quickly got like 1 million plus views on our channels. And then it also was shown in galleries like the Guggenheim in New York. And so there was suddenly, people were excited about our stuff, both, I guess, with views and also creatively and artistically. And so that was really exciting. What's the second part of the question?
The second part was, what was it like to start working for, you know, getting commercial work, commercial commissions on the basis of work that kind of just came through Tell No One with no expectation?
I mean, the moment when you start to see the moment when it's you feel like actually you can start to earn a living from this, is a very exciting moment. And that was exciting. It didn't happen straight away. There's this idea, definitely, that when you start working in the commercial industry, that you start making lots of money, and you're set. And I think for some people that's the case, but for us, for Luke and I, we're so particular and we're so idea orientated that we don't just do everything. We don't do the jobs. If people send us jobs, mostly we turn them down. And so although we started making money, I still had my 9 to 5, and it only probably left my 9 to 5 about 6-7 years ago when I was about 27. But regardless of that, we're starting to make money. And that's exciting. But then with that comes a new education, which is working with clients and working in an industry and working and the business side of it. And that's something new entirely that you're not taught in film school. Yep.
And there's a couple of things that I really like that you mentioned. Is the work in the 9 to 5, which is something that a lot of people gloss over in the industry. It's like there's it takes a long time to start to just live over the things that you really, really want to do.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with working a 9 to 5 alongside trying to lift
All right.
your filmmaking or your writing career off the ground. I'm curious, before we get into the dealing with clients and brands, about how you pick those projects, because you mentioned that you and Luke were very particular about what you said yes to,
Oh
which
yeah.
how particular, and how did you pick your projects?
One thing that any filmmaker will understand once they get like a little bit of success is that people tell you one thing but don't really mean it. And usually they tell you they love your work, they think you're amazing, and they want to work with you. But what they don't really, they're not really honest with you about is, we just want you to do what you've done before because we know that works and we know we can sell that to a client. We suddenly realized that most of the work that we're given, we're just asked to repeat the stuff that we've done before. And for two young creatives, we wasn't really interested in that. We were really keen on pushing ourselves and really keen on trying new things. And so most of the work that came in didn't allow for that, or they would say they were excited to try new things, but then when push came to shove, they would kind of ask us to just to do what we did before, and we found that quite tough. And so we really tried to choose things or projects that had something exciting about them, something that we felt could be, that we hadn't tried before, or was a really interesting idea.
Let's talk a little bit more about the projects that you said yes to.
Yeah.
So what was it like kind of working with, mentioned in the commercial industry, there's the creative agencies, then there's the
Yeah.
client. What was that process like once you decided to take on one of their commissions?
I mean, it really depends on the project. I think different clients, it's a people-facing industry, so it really depends on the personalities.
Mm.
Mostly, though, it was great. Like, people, regardless of what side of the industry you're on, are generally excited to be having fun and making something. Um, it's and if you, as long as like you're surrounded by good people, you can work through like dealing with like, the non-creative people, the people who just want to make sure that they have an advert out on
Mm.
time and stuff. But generally, like, people just want to make cool and fun stuff.
And what was the biggest learning curve for you when working with all of these different agents within
Yeah.
the commercial space?
The very first time Luke and I went into a meeting with like creatives and clients and, the head of some kind of big super conglomerate company, was one of the most terrifying moments in my life, because then at some point in the meeting they will have to stop and look at you, and you have to go through your idea
Uh-huh.
and sell it to them. And that was the worst thing when I was in my early to mid 20s. Like, I'm a homeboy. I'm an introvert. Like, to go and suddenly be a salesman almost and
Mm.
and kind of sell it to people was traumatizing to begin with. But what I found, thank God, is that the more I did it, the easier it became, and the more, I guess, the more you realize that people are, you have all kinds of people and all kinds of levels of society, but they are just people. And actually, if you just think of them as just like family, or I don't know, just like people on the street, it's not so bad. You just go in and talk to them. But that's something that
Mm.
you really do. It really does get better just through doing it.
And what is like because with narrative films, it a lot of people, a lot of directors talk about the long years in between writing something or coming up with something and actually getting it made and then getting it seen.
I'm starting to feel it.
We'll get on to that. But with the commercial work, what's the turnaround time like? Like from getting a
so quick.
What, like how quick?
It's great. It's the best. You know, that's like I'm quite critical of the commercial industry, but that's definitely the best thing about it is the speed. You pitch in a job which takes a couple of weeks, and you get the job, and then shoot going from, I think it'll be like a 4 or 5 week pre-production, 1 to 4 day shoot maybe, and then 2 or 3 weeks in post, depending on how much visual effects, maybe a bit more if it's quite effects heavy. And then you're done.
I mean,
then you get paid, get a coin.
It sounds magical. I've never heard of it.
It's that's like the best part of it. And if you can give yourself enough distance from it, from the work, it doesn't have to break your heart every time.
Wait, let's unpack that for a second. How does it work?
Well, you know, like making something creative, making something that's meaningful to you is hard work. It doesn't. There's a cost to it, and especially as a director, writer or director, you put your everything in it, and you have to give yourself. You have to give yourself so much. Give so much of yourself to it, to cause it into being. Even doing commercials for Luke and I, because we care so much about what we do, we give all of ourselves to it, and that can be draining sometimes. But if you are doing a commercial and you don't, you care about your work, but it's also not high on your list of things that are important to you, you could do the work and still walk away feeling like drained and exhausted by it.
What are some of the tips that you found for yourself to give yourself that distance from the work?
To be honest, I think that's generally really hard because you care about your work, and I'm not going to say don't care about your work. You're going to care about it, and you're going to want it to be the best it can be. I think it's really important to show yourself some respect, that this is a job, and so there will be people that demand more from you than is ethically right. I think, for example, the editor in his house, she was like, I'm here for you, let's do this, but just let you know, at 7 p.m. is home time, and I'm not working weekends. And so she set that boundary. And I think that is a very, very important thing for anyone working in the industry, especially when there's a really grey area between work and art and pleasure. And so to say, you know what, for my peace of mind or for my mental health, I want to make sure that I'm not working evenings or I'm not working Saturdays and Sundays. Like, you shouldn't feel apologetic about that. You should, support yourself.
I think that's a very important point. Talking kind of more broadly about the commercial industry, what were some of the important skills that you think that you picked up while working with brands and agencies and ads, that you then kind of were using to nurture your own filmmaking voice?
I think doing commercials and stuff really solidified my need for developing ideas to be, it was really important for us anyway to be like, we're doing this because the idea is exciting, and the idea is important and clever or witty or smart, or it's saying something very specific. I think when you know what you're doing is saying something that has fire to it, I think that's a good engine for you to be making that project. And often most of the stuff in this industry doesn't really have that. And I think, and I'm saying this now because I feel like I have a foot in the door, and so I'm kind of seeing behind the curtain a little bit. And I actually think there's a lot of material out there which people just need to make because they need to make sure that there's content. And so not everything has a particular fire behind it. And so if you can find that fire, that thing that makes it special to you, I think that's a really important thing.
And how do you know for yourself when a project has that fire behind it?
Usually I like to do like the couple of sentences test where like I can explain it to someone in a few sentences and something kind of clicks. It sounds good, it sounds exciting, and you want to watch it. And I think if you have to spend a while, and this is just me, I don't know if this is like a rule, but like if you have to spend a while to explain what your idea is, or if you're struggling to explain it, it's probably not quite there yet.
And kind of starting to think, moving more into the narrative industry and the film industry proper. As you were kind of working and getting really successful in the commercial side of things, were you still trying to do like raise budget or raise funding for narrative projects, or did you have other projects kind of on the go that were more yours, that were not for commercial purposes?
No, like I think the two industries are so much more separate than I ever imagined, the commercial and the narrative. That I found that as you grow in commercials, you begin to, the narrative work begins to slip away. And so it took, and then this was when I'd made Tickle Monster. That was the first time in years that I was able to get back into it. That said, I was still really keen to tell stories and to write and stuff. So behind the scenes, I was trying to write stuff pretty unsuccessfully.
So let's talk about Tickle Monster, because that was a Film for Channel 4 short as part of Horror. All of those shorts are really, really cool, and Tickle Monster is really fun as well. So how did that materialize? Because you mentioned that you felt separate from the narrative film industry, and then how do you get your kind of first big narrative short commissioned by Film 4 and then premiering it South by Southwest? Like, that's a big deal.
So I had been into meetings of Film 4 like sporadically since finishing uni, and so getting Tickle Monster made is pretty much because two people, Fiona Lamptey, who was an exec at Film 4, she was one of the first people. I think I just finished uni and I did my end of year film, and she just brought me in just to say hi, just check and just to see what I'm about. And then through Fiona, she introduced me to Eva Yates, who was another exec at Film 4. And even though I wasn't really making narrative films, every now and again, Eva would just check in to see how I'm doing. And just before, I guess it was like 2016, she checked in and just like, we need to commission some short horror films. Would you be interested in making one? And I was like, yeah, of course. And she's like, well, think of a horror film within SB 5 minutes. I think it was $5K, the budget. She basically gave me a brief. I pitched my take, which was Tickle Monster. And they liked it. And yeah, we made it.
I mean, amazing. I can fully imagine how quickly you replied to that email. Yes, please. I would like to. Sure.
Yeah.
So what about the premiere at South by Southwest? Because you mentioned that you kind of grew disenchanted with submitting films to film festivals and so on. Were film festivals kind of a space that did you go to just as a film fan, or did you go to try to network or meet people?
No, not really. I mean, I went to film festivals as a fan. Like I used to go to the London Film Festival and the Lesbian and Gay Film Festival in London. And so I went as a fan, but I never really went to like, not really like, what's the word?
Networker?
Networker, yeah, for card and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm not really like that, but I'm gonna watch a movie and have a little bit of a dance, but and also with Tell No One, we made the films for the internet. Film festivals wasn't the way we became successful, and we wouldn't be able to become successful through that route. It was we became successful through people watching our stuff, and film festivals is more about prestige and a circuit and industry. So I never really thought much about film festivals as a means to, I guess, as a means to moving up in my career. And so Tickle Monster going into South by Southwest was probably the first time or at least for a long time, that I started to submit into festivals, and I submitted into Sundance and South by Southwest. And primarily it was only because Tickle Monster was premiered in Film 4. No, Channel 4. And so most film festivals, they don't allow you to screen a short film if it's had a premiere somewhere. And Sundance and South by Southwest are cool with that. And it's expensive, so I thought, let me just choose two, and I chose them, and Sundance I didn't get in. But then I got into South by Southwest, which is amazing. And yeah, we went to Austin, met some awesome filmmakers. South by Southwest is great.
And I love that you mentioned that you just submitted it to 2 festivals, because a lot of filmmakers think that if you submit kind of through the usual submission process to festivals, that doesn't get seen, or there's no chance of getting in, and it's not true. Those films do get watched. And I want
to expensive.
Yeah, it is.
It's so expensive to make it to festivals, and I didn't have any money, so it's like, I want to and because it was premiered at Channel 4. My need for it to go to a festival wasn't necessarily for exposure, so I didn't feel like I needed to send it to lots of festivals for lots of people to see it. I just submitted it to festivals, to ones that I thought, wouldn't it be fun to go? and so yeah, and it was South by Southwest. It's really fun.
So what did you learn from that experience as like your, I guess, first big networky narrative film festival circuit?
Like, I loved it more so than maybe with His House, because when you're doing short films, you are on a slate of other short filmmakers, and you do everything together with them. So you have all your films premiere at the same time. You all go to the same screenings, you go to the same parties, you hang out. It was really fun, and it was really great just to hang out with other filmmakers from around the world, and just to have a good time in Austin, Texas. With a feature film, it's slightly different. You're just there with obviously your team, and this is just my experience, it's much more professional. It's much more about for His House, for example, it already got bought by Netflix, so it's about doing press and doing PR, and staying around for the Q&As. And from my experience, I didn't quite get that same kind of, what I think is quite exciting about a festival, which is spending time with other filmmakers and hanging out.
And when you were making Tickle Monster, was there anything that you kind of noticed perhaps that changed in your approach to directing from all of your experience directing commercial content?
It's a good question. What's
Ah,
changed?
Come to you again.
What, you know what, I think a lot's changed. I think it's funny because I think a lot's changed, but also I think much has changed. I think what has changed is just confidence, and I think you only get that just by doing, and which is why I always think like the number one like advice I can give it to anyone starting out is just to make stuff, and like don't worry too much if it's successful or not. That doesn't matter. The main thing is that you're making something. It's not really meant to be successful the first time you do it, or if it is successful, that's amazing. But from my experience, like the first few films are terrible. So yeah, I think it's just confidence of knowing my way around the set, but also knowing the process of filmmaking. Like I'm very literate in the different departments and what each department needs to do.
Good answer. And do you think that kind of understanding of what each department needs to be doing comes from that experimenting in just by yourself, playing around with things, playing around with technology and editing and software?
Yeah, totally. And also, but then not just doing that, but then being on a film set with professionals and seeing what they're doing and talking to them. And I feel like as a filmmaker, I'm particularly well-rounded because that's just the journey I've been on as filmmaker. I think, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case for most filmmakers a generation below me, where they really do have the means to make films by themselves. But I think before me, there's definitely this kind of idea that you have like actors, directors, or like special effects directors, or Hollywood directors, or you know, more European, more I guess experimental directors. And I do think I've come from a school where I had to educate myself in all of the different ways.
And there's something that always comes up, I think, in kind of in conversations around making films, and both on the both short films and then feature-length films, and it's thinking about an audience, like who is that film for? And
Yeah.
you think about an audience when you're thinking about a film, or when you're pitching it, when you're moving through those different stages?
All the time. I only think about audience. I mean, making work is a conversation. The genesis of storytelling is around the campfire. It's a storyteller to an audience, and it's not really changed. And you need to have a relationship with an audience. You need to know how you're communicating to them. You need to know what you're saying. You need to know how they're responding, if they're understanding what you're saying, or else I don't fully understand the point.
Good answer. And I wanted to start kind of moving in, because after Tickle Monster premiered at South by, and there's something you mentioned at the beginning of our chat, which was that there was a moment where you kind of made a conscious decision to recenter yourself and really focus on getting into narrative filmmaking and the film industry. Was that around the time you made Tickle Monster, or kind of can you talk a little bit about that moment when you were like, right, I need to do this now?
You know, it was around the moment I was on like a commercials job, and we were standing around a cup of coffee, and the client, like to sheet a cup of coffee, not the coffee to drink, and the client, the client was very particular about the shade of brown the coffee should be, and there was a lot of debates about whether it was too creamy looking or too dark looking, and it was while that conversation was happening, I was thinking, I need to change something up in my life. And I don't know if this is the right line of direction. I don't see this as my future. And so it was around that time I was like, I need to be more proactive, and I need to not more proactive. You know, as I mentioned briefly, that I was still writing, but not writing very well. And I decided around that time, probably like a year before Tickle Monster, I need to understand storytelling better. I need to understand writing better. And so I studied it and I practiced. And I tried to treat it like any other part of filmmaking. Like when it needs to understand sound, I, you know, I taught myself, and I needed to understand visual effects. I taught myself, and I think I grew up thinking writing was different. It was more you either had it or you didn't, and it's not something you could just learn. But I think I decided, you know what? Why don't I treat it like something that you have to learn, and let me just understand it like someone understands how to build a chair. Just understand what it means to tell a story. And so I studied it. A book I love is called Into the Woods by John York. I found it so illuminating. And I really just, I stopped thinking about writing as something ephemeral or just this thing that comes to you in some inspiration. I started to think of it as nuts and bolts, as building something, as how you shape a narrative. And I think that really served me well.
And what about kind of that that proactiveness that you kind of alluded to before, of putting yourself in this separate industry? Kind of what were some of the moves that you were doing? I read that you were selected as a Screen International Star of Tomorrow in 2016, which is amazing, and it's one of those kind of talent lists that everybody looks at. But overall, kind of in general, what were you doing aside from kind of studying the craft of screenwriting to make those moves into the narrative industry?
I mean, that was mainly it, but also, so I started to save money from making commercials to make a short film, which I was almost going to do before the Film 4 project came up. But also, I got an agent through my commercial work, and because some of my commercial work, there is some narrative stuff. So there was, I did a thing for the, oh my gosh.
National Gallery one?
National Gallery, yeah. I did.
The one with Anna Friel, right?
With Anna Friel, yeah. So I dabbled in some narrative adjacent stuff. And so I was able to get an agent, and to getting an agent, he put me forward for Screen Star of Tomorrow. Yeah, that was kind of it.
It's interesting you mentioned the Metamorphosis short that you did for National Gallery, because that's the one that when I watched it seemed very much like your work. Very, like, I could see the threads that tied it into Tickle Monster, tied into his house. There's always kind of elements of the magical, of the surreal. And I was wondering kind of what about kind of genre adjacent visuals or stories is it that attracts you?
I guess I like spectacle. I like cinema that is agile and fun and can transport you somewhere. But believe it or not, I'm a Black man and I'm also a gay man. And so I've grown up like many people in the world who have a strong love of cinema, but there's always a sense that as much as I love Hitchcock and I love Kubrick and I love Spielberg and I love all these amazing filmmakers, that there's something missing on the screen, and nothing about what you're watching has any relation to my life. and the people in my life. There seems to be no connection. I've always felt like I want to be able to tell stories that are as bold and as full of ideas and visuals and concepts that can really transport an audience, but at the same time, the people inside the film are people I've spent my life with. So I feel like that's kind of my thing.
It's a great answer, Remi. But that thing that I mentioned that's kind of stood out for me in the screen article, which is available to read still, they're all online, and is that you mentioned his house way back in 2017.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of then move into his house, which your first feature, and kind of that, again, it seems, thinking about something we were talking about when we were talking about your commercial work, how agile and quick it is, like that's spent quite a long time in your head, in development. So I wanted to ask you about the beginnings of his house. Like where did it come from? Was it a scene? Was it a character? Like how did it start materializing?
So the concept didn't come from me. It was when I was doing commercials, the production company I was signed to shared office space with two producers. And so every time I went in, I'd speak to them about work and how that one day, I want my ambitions of to make feature films one day. And they mentioned to me that they were working on a project. They wanted to make a horror film based on the immigrant experience, but they were working with some other writers, and it wasn't quite connecting, or they weren't. Something wasn't really working out, and they asked me if I wanted to pitch them my take on it. And at first, I said I didn't think this was right for me because I wasn't sure what connection I could have with the material. It didn't feel like I could see enough of myself in it. But then I did a little thought experiment, and it's like, well, if I had to do it, if I was forced to do it, how would I put myself on screen? What kind of authentic place could I kind of mine and put it into the story? And I got to thinking about growing up in London, and I feel like for many people of color growing up in London, there's this kind of split that you have with yourself, where there's one side of you, you're in a society that isn't always that welcoming to you, sometimes quite hostile, and so you split between these two different ways forward. There's this one side of you that wants to assimilate and to disappear and to, I guess, hide within the culture and to kind of, to, I guess, give up those things that make you different. And then there's the other side of you that is frustrated and furious and wants to rebel and wants to be proud of your background and wants to hold on to it and raise the flag. And then those two sides of you are always kind of battling with one another. And I thought it would be really interesting to tell that story from a married couple and who have just arrived in this country and taken these two different way forward. And so I pitched them that idea that would be a very psychological two-hander of these two different characters, and they really liked it. And so we developed it from a treatment to like a breakdown and then to a script.
Amazing. It's always, I mean, I know how long films take to make, but it's always such a surprise to just really put dates on when things started to materialize and when they actually reach audiences.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go too much into his house. People watching this haven't seen the film, which is out on Netflix, and you should absolutely see it. In the Dark, Exactly. For full effect. But I wanted to kind of ask you about working with actors, because
Yeah.
kind of with the majority of your experience kind of being either in experimental videos and short films and commercials and stuff, kind of, and his house very much is hinged on your lead actors, on Sophie and Wumi. So how did you work on getting the most out of them as a director?
I think this is again something to do with confidence as a director. But when I first started making films at uni, and especially like the uni projects, which I swear to God, if anyone ever finds them, like I will, I will burn down houses to keep that secret.
You put a challenge out onto the internet, but someone's gonna
oh
find
God. When I first started working with actors, like again, maybe this is just my mind. Like I studied working with actors, I read books and whatnot, and so it's really important to me to have like, all this sort of notes of what kind of directions or what kind of notes I should give them, and if something doesn't work, having a backup note to give them, and all of that stuff's really important, and I really love doing that. But as you get older and as you work with more people and you work with really talented actors like Sophie and Wumi, it's more important for me to make sure that they feel comfortable, they feel safe to be able to experiment, that everyone's a team, that we're all working together and we all want to make the same things. And then once all that is in place, then just to get out of the way, just to really like give them everything they need. Before the shoot, I would ask them like, what do you need? Like what for you to work your best, what are the things you usually need? And I try and make sure that I give it to them, give them what they need, and then get out of the way, let them do their thing, and then give them notes and when things aren't working, and if they hopefully they understand where you're coming from, and then it's just great.
And we've talked a little bit about collaborators and learning to let go, and that you've just kind of echoed that as well, with your actors. But with your experience and your kind of self-taught nature of teaching yourself the skills that you knew you needed to understand, and moving into a feature-length production like his house, who did you find were your most important collaborators that you think aspiring directors should kind of think about and nurture?
I think everyone's important, but I don't know if I could it's like picking a favorite children. I don't know if you.
That's fair.
I really think like everyone is so important, and you'll be making a mistake not to undervalue someone on set. And again, with Tell No One, I think it's really, and I think actually we were guilty of it a few times as Tell No One, and that was a learning curve, because when you're two directors, you tend to kind of cocoon yourself and protect yourself by being, when you're a duo, and then not let everyone in. And I think that's a really dangerous way to be when you're collaborating. I really think it's important to let everyone in and make sure that everyone feel like they have a part in making something, because I think when people feel like they are important and they have a role to play, I think they care about what they're doing more. And I think that's I think it's really easy, and I know it's easy because I've been guilty of it when I was younger, in kind of protecting yourself by closing people off. But I think it might make sense at the time, but it doesn't pay dividends. I think you really have to learn, if you're not naturally good at it, to open yourself up.
That is really, really important. And what do you think were your biggest learning curves in the making of his house, from going kind of from short form work to a feature length film?
There's a really frustrating feeling that everything has an effect that you don't really learn until you're making the feature film or long form anything. Where if you change something on one day, if you change like an outfit, then it changes something a few days later because you have to go back to that scene. Or like there is such a knock-on effect that you don't realize how frustrating really simple change could destroy a whole, I don't know, schedule for the next few weeks. And so I think really understanding that and really understanding scheduling and to really make firm decisions early on is quite a new thing for me.
And kind of with your I mentioned a little bit the kind of that I love the surreal and the magical elements of your work, and with that with those elements of his house, and there's a couple of scenes that will instantly stick out for anyone who's seen the film. Is how do you work with those? Do you storyboard them extensively? Do you kind of improvise on the set, or kind of what's your process with those scenes that are much more visually led, much more magical?
Yeah, I mean, I storyboard everything, you know, mostly because I've been trained to do that with Tone No One. Stuff has always been quite visual, and so we've always had to have storyboards so that people can understand what we're trying to do, and that all the heads of department can kind of, you know, dance to the same beat. And so, but especially with the more visual stuff and the more, I guess, the scary scenes, like everything's planned. Like I ideally like to be able to play around, testing things out before the shoot. We did tests for most of the visual effects. Sorry, the special effects. Some of the visual effects, we did some what's the word? But basically, sometimes they mock up the film using CGI software. We did that a few times, but that's quite expensive, so we didn't really do that often. I just think it's really important to plan. In fact, like I think that's like part of the job, and it's the hardest job actually as a director, is to plan and to make sure that if you know what everything you need to do in each day, you know what you're doing. Because if you've made at least one short film in your life, you'll know that if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. Things just like, there's something about films that like you just show up and something goes wrong, and you have to be prepared for that. And you have to think on your feet. And so if you can prepare the best you can before that day, like, you just need to.
Remi, thank you so much. Just before we wrap up, I've got one last question for you. And it's kind of, you know, you've been working steadily for so long and having so much success with his house, which is more than deserved. And
thank you.
I'm thinking kind of, what would you tell yourself, or what do you wish you'd known in hindsight when you were starting out?
Wow. Be kind to yourself. Like, failing is hard at the time, but, you know, making mistakes is how you learn. It's how you get better and how you understand yourself. So be kind to yourself.
That's such a lovely note to end on as well.
Cool.
Thank you so much for your time, for your insight, and for your films, Remi.
Thank you.
And to everyone watching, thank you so much for tuning in. And remember that there are 3 more days of the BFI Feature Film Festival to go. You can find all of the information about all of the events over on the BFI Feature Film website. There's a program packed with stuff, and all of the events are free and available to watch worldwide. So enjoy the rest of the festival. And thank you, Remi.
Thank you. Bye. Enjoy the festival.